want to take this time to welcome City Board of Directors to our agenda meeting for the February 8th, 2022. This is our opportunity to review the agenda for the formal board meeting that will take place on February the 15th, 2022. Before we get started, I want to take this time to recognize one of our colleagues, City Director Kathy Peck, who is the known owner and leader of Trios and the staple in the city of Little Rock as a restaurant. Trios is. She's a staple not only as a restaurateur, but also as a public servant who just recently has been named a finalist and awardee, not only a finalist, but also an awardee of the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame. So let's all take this time to give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
Please give us a few remarks.
Well, the sixth time is a charm. You know, I've been a finalist 6 years in a row, and I guess they just couldn't deny me any longer. I don't know. I'm super proud. I have a great restaurant family, and I'm very, very proud. So I think 2022 is going to be a good year. Thank you.
I concur. We are busting from the seams with being proud for you and what you exhibit here in our city and what Trios means to our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, are there any questions on items 1 through 6? I do want to take time to acknowledge our efforts as it relates to focusing on our community violence intervention proposals as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act, the close to $2 million that we are directing towards community program efforts in the name of prevention, intervention, and treatment. It's been a great effort by our community programs office, our Office of Neighborhood Safety, as well as the Office of Executive Administration to get us through this point. There's been a lot of innovation. This is a first set, these 10 programs, and we hope to get more programs funded here shortly through expedited efforts. And so we are proud that this is coming before the members of the city board to vote on as it relates to this coming next Tuesday for these efforts that truly focuses on prevention, intervention, treatment. I think what we have, Mr. Moore, would you kind of give a brief explanation of what we have before us? More so than what I know I gave a quick overview.
Mayor, members, well, we have 2 items, which would be items 5 and 6. Item 5, we sort of talked about a little bit last week. This is similar to our Bridge to Work program, where we're going to enter a contract with Fab 44 to coordinate a day labor program for us. So very similar. They'll recruit the individuals. They'll get paid on a daily basis because that's one of the complaints I think our staff has to deal with. Well, there's no opportunities out here. So while they're with us, they'll also get to, we'll also be able to talk about what else do you need from a holistic standpoint to sort of get back into society and be a contributing citizen. So that's item 5. Item 6 is a resolution dealing with 10 different organizations, and I sent you all yesterday sort of a summary of those separate organizations. Again, some are you've seen before, some are new, some are very unique. So I believe that we put this RFP out in maybe December. So this will be coming before you all next Tuesday. I did ask the city attorney and yesterday and again today, part of the dilemma in getting these contracts out is once the board adopts them, we've got to move with haste to get the contracts completed and and signed. So he's agreed to meet with his staff to ensure that they're expedited.
Thank you so much for that overview again. This is just a direct effort of what we're doing from a holistic approach to focus on crime prevention particularly for our youth and our young adults. What we've seen is that a large portion of the homicides are around ages 11 to 24. We wanted to take some innovative efforts. I want to commend the selection team who went through a long process to really get us to this point, because it had to be, as Mr. Moore shared, innovative, but also had to work with organizations where this was maybe their first time to apply and work with community programs. And so I firmly believe that community programs also learned a lot as well. And so that'll be very helpful to us as we continue to focus on a holistic approach, which includes, both proactive policing, but also prevention, intervention, and treatment programs for our youth and young adults. Director Adcock.
Yes. Mayor, I would like for 5 and 6 to both be held separate. I would like to have a presentation on 6. I think it's very important. We have lots of people that watch this, and from us just voting on these things, they don't realize what these programs are, what the impact is going to be, what we want the outcomes to be. So I would like for us on item 6 to have a presentation, listen each one and going over all the information that you've sent to the board members. And then on item 5, Mr. Moore, is this the same group that we contracted with last time? Which I believe was a church down on 7th Street?
This is a new program, so we have not had this type of program in the past.
Then I would like to also request a presentation on item 5 so that the community will know what we're doing with not only the funds, but what we're bringing in to serve the needs of some of the people in our community.
Thank you so much, Director Adcock. Director Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And one of the things that I was going to ask for was a presentation on a more detailed presentation on the programs as well. Director Adcock already took care of that. And I did just want to remind my colleagues that over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been on the CYF for 7 years, and it's not a commission that just checks off recommendations and doesn't ask a lot of questions. I mean, we've been before the board. One time there were people who were a little upset because we were getting a lot more detailed with our monitoring, and we've gone out and visited programs. We've gone out on calls when they knew we were coming, and we also made calls when they didn't know we were coming. But to Director Adcock's, and I think it's really important that we get money into the community, but to Director Adcock's point, because some of these are new, I think it's important for the board to ask those hard questions to make sure that they have the capacity and we're not setting anybody up for failure.
No, thank you so much, Director Webb, and we do appreciate your service on CYF, and I'm glad CYF was able to review these contracts and take the time and support. So thank you so much for your support, Director Webb. Vice Mayor Hines.
Thanks. So just to clarify, so these are part of our American Rescue Act funds, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and we've had these bids out on the street since December, right? Bruce?
Correct.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to clarify, and so glad to see. I was looking through some of the vendors on the community violence reduction. I see some entities I know, but I know haven't been involved in our programming, and some existing vendors to our services that we've had really good track records with. So I appreciate this and look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Director Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. I too was going to ask for a more detailed presentation, especially on the violence, but also on the day labor program. I believe I have a 5.4 entity here in Ward 6, and I was wondering if that was the same organization. But I guess I can get that information during the full presentation or what's going to be sent out.
Mr. Moore?
It is the same organization.
Okay, so they're still located in their original location. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Wright. Director Campuris?
Just going along with the request for the, when they present this next week, if I understand correctly from what you said before, the age group we're really concerned about is 17 to 24, is that right?
No, sir. Close. Really concerned about 11 to 24.
I thought that the people that the chief was talking about that were causing most of the mischief were upper teenagers going into their early 20s.
That's true. He also shared that what we're seeing is that the homicides are majority of the homicides are between 11 and 24. That is the homicides, but then those that are contributing them are somewhere between 15 and 24. So that's why I said I wanted to expound upon your.
Well, when they make the presentation, who's going to make the presentation on all these programs? I got this yesterday from Bruce or Mr. Moore. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to use first names.
You can use my first.
That 2 lines was not enough for me to really understand what they were going to do. So when they make this presentation, to me, they need to be able to say, this is directed to that group of people and how we're addressing them. And secondly, going back to what Lance said, this money runs out over what period of time?
These are annual contracts, so it would be a 1-year contract.
So basically, we're going to do this for a year, and then a year from now, what's planned? What's the follow-up plan if it's working?
We typically, we have a contract with them, with the organization, and we typically say that if they meet the parameters of the contract and they've done well, then we renew for up to 3 years. So every year, but up to 3 years.
No, but I'm talking about where's the money coming from a year from now? If this is this our money or the rescue money? I guess they're all the same.
Let me answer that question. Director Campuris, the money for this particular programming, which is about 1.5, a little over $1.5 million, this money is American Rescue Plan Act dollars. As Director Webb will share with you, there's no program that is guaranteed the following year additional dollars. They have to go back through an application process. CYF then reviews. CYF puts forth the review statement of sorts, and it comes back to the city board. So there's no program that's guaranteed money the next year from a community program standpoint. So conceivably, after a year after the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, then these organizations that are funded would be applying for existing prevention and intervention treatment program dollars, which we know is about $5.5 million.
That's what I'm talking about. So just so people know, a year from now, we got to go through this process again and use EIT money potentially.
Yes. Director Peck.
Thank you, Mayor. I sent to all of the members of the board, and I think I included you and Bruce, an article about cure violence, a public health model to reduce gun violence. It used to be called Chicago Ceasefire. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to take a few minutes. It's rather lengthy, but it's got some excellent information focusing on an individual and community level change where in communities where it's normal for young people to carry a gun. And what I found most interesting, and I bet you'd find it interesting too, Dr. Campuris, is they treat it like a public health intervention, just like we have been enduring with COVID for over 2 years. It's got some really good ideas, and the reason I bring that up right now is I'm looking forward to the presentation, and Director Adcock and Director Webb, thank you for asking for a presentation on each of these programs, but it seems like it would behoove us to have an overarching blueprint to address violence for the whole city. And there's so many people out there already doing good work, and it seems like it would be beneficial for us to bring all of these groups together, so we are not duplicating programs. We can evaluate what's already being done. I know measuring and evaluating is super important, and Director Richardson reminds us of that quite often. I don't know how that would look. I don't have an answer to that, but I would encourage you to read this document, because I think it's, and it's not just Chicago ceasefire. It talks about programs in Pittsburgh and Phoenix, Brooklyn, and I think Baltimore. It was a eye-opening read for me. I've read it a couple of times, and I would encourage the city to have an overarching blueprint to address violence in our communities that all these programs would be under, and that all the stakeholders would be involved in.
No, thank you so much, Director Peck, and that is definitely something that we'll be working on and working on collectively as a entire city together. I also do want to remind, just for clarification for members of the board, just want to make sure we're abundantly clear, is that both the prevention and intervention dollars, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act dollars as it relates to community violence, they are all contracts, not grants. And so I want to make sure that that is understood. They're all contracts for service, which goes through a number of different things from a legal process and have to be in compliance. So just want to make sure we were clear from that standpoint. Director Richardson, then after Director Richardson, Director Wyrick.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Peck, for sending us that information. We have a host of research-based information here at our disposal here in Little Rock based on what's been done since 1993. For some reason, we haven't embraced it to the extent that we're looking at information that's coming from other municipalities. I find your comment about a health crisis. I think you hit the nail on the head that with respect to opioid, because when we were trying to do the same thing with the crack epidemic, they said, no, this is a criminal crisis, not a health crisis. And I just think that that's somewhat interesting how we selectively determine how we embrace issues and how we couch and frame issues in terms of how we respond to issues. I find it quite interesting that the opioid epidemic is considered a health crisis, whereas when those of us who are working with people who unfortunately were on crack try to get that same kind of designation, we were repeatedly told, no, this is a criminal justice designation. This is a criminal justice issue. It wasn't a health issue. And I think that we have to be real careful, guys, when we keep tossing around catchphrases like comprehensive, holistic, wraparound without fully understanding, knowing what that is. And I know I have many more questions next week, because what I've seen on those the list, and thank you, Mr. Moore, for sharing it with us, it seemed like a lot of these programs are site-based programs, and the violence is not happening at these particular sites. And in fact, when we hired people in the past, we hired people who work with young people who were banned from a lot of these sites, whether it's boys and girls clubs, whether it's community centers, they were banned. We went out and got them back in those community centers and boys and girls club as part of a program. So I think we need to look at, in my opinion, based on my experience and work history, I didn't see enough, Bruce, enough street-based work. I didn't see enough work where we're out there engaging the people in the community where they live and engaging the right population. I mean, I heard, Mr. Mayor, you say that the community programs, we all learned a lot. And my question would be, we learned a lot from who? We have people here in our community who know the community, who've been through this and done this. And have we tapped into their knowledge base? Have we reached out to them? I mean, there's been so many different things that's happening, unfortunately, to the detriment of a lot of young people who look like me and you, Mayor, in our community. And then now that there's this outrage, and I remember 4 years ago in November bringing this issue up because of Reverend Johnson and others coming down and telling us about this. It was silent. Now that it's been declared a public emergency, a public crisis, everybody wants to get involved. Everybody wants to reach out to them because there's money available now. When there wasn't money available, no one was reaching out to them. And a lot of programs we worked with in the past, and Bruce and Dean, you guys can attest to this, they were doing it without the resources that we have available now. So I thank Director Peck for sending what you sent. Bruce, I thank you for sending us. I thank the program staff and everyone else who's been involved. And not trying to be totally dismissive, but it seems like it's all site-based planning. And these incidents are not happening at these sites. They're not happening at the Boys and Girls Clubs. They're not happening at some of these programs that we had mentioned. And I didn't see in the brief description any attempts or efforts to go out and engage young people in their environment. And in fact, when I hired coordinators, gang intervention specialists back in the days, many of these people couldn't get jobs at some of these places that we're talking about funding based on education, work history, and or criminal background. So I just think we need to proceed cautiously and carefully and make sure we're getting the bigger bang for our buck, and to do something to be effective, not to say we're doing something, to address it in a holistic, the catchphrase, holistic, wrap around, comprehensive way. And I have a ton of questions next week. I'm glad that this is before us, and I'm glad that my colleagues have this held separately and get presentations on them, because I think it's really, really interesting time in our city right now, from a public safety standpoint, from a public health standpoint, and how do we deem selectively, how we're deeming issues that are important or that deserve the priority that we're giving this right now. Right now, we're giving this a priority. And I thank for Mayor that you have saw the need to do this. And I'm not being dismissive of your predecessor, but we didn't have that 3 or 4 years ago, and we were still having homicides, and they were happening in certain places in our city. And I'll say this again, Bruce, we can put a box around our city and almost determine where they're going to happen. And demographically, we can look at the population that's committing these acts and those that are victims of these acts. We can do that. We have the demographic information, we have the research-based information, we have the knowledge of our community to put in place things that are going to benefit the community, that's going to help the community, and fund programs. Not that I want to have funded or a board member have funded, that we take the politics out of funding. And I think Director Webb made the great point. Right now, we don't have any intermediaries monitoring, evaluating, providing technical assistance to those programs to be the bridge between the city, which is the funder, and those programs, which is the fundee. So I think when you do that, not have the intermediary there, I think you increase the likelihood of the funding getting politicized. So that's all I want to say on that. And I thank you guys for coming up with this and bringing this to us. And I'm almost certain I have a ton of questions next week. Not 4 hours worth of meetings worth of questions like we had 4 hour meeting last week, but certainly a way that we can be effective and impact and help save the lives of young people who are living and were born into conditions that they didn't create, but they have to navigate various minefields because they're living with some cultural abnormal norms. That's what they're living with. They didn't create that. And we got to reach out to them. We got to go get them and show them that, in fact, we do care for them. One of my colleagues said that our intervention specialists, our crisis team, they're too old to talk to the young people. I don't know what's the magical age. I've never heard a young person say, well, OG, how old are you? I'm 52. Well, man, you 2 years too old to talk to me. I think that's ridiculous. And I think we need to reach out to them and let them know that they matter and that they care consistently, that they are a part of our community. The only time they show up on our radar screen is when we're talking about them in negative ways. Whether it's caravanning, whether it's this silly violence we're dealing with. They want to be acknowledged. They want to be recognized. And we got to do it in ways that's going to encourage them to do positive things. And that's all I have to say on that, man.
No, Director Richardson, you are absolutely correct. I want to provide some context to what we have before us. Because Director Richardson is absolutely correct, we have been focused on how do we get more programs as it relates to be off-site or on-site in the areas of where most of the crime is happening and going directly to those particular areas rather than expecting those that we're trying to help to come to other off-site locations. So Director Richardson is absolutely correct. And so that's the reason as we were going through this process, if we all will recall, we made an October announcement that created the Office of Neighborhood Safety that was going to be pulling together a number of different things. And part of their key learnings was that many of the organizations or the types of projects that we really want to fund that goes to the heart or the core of addressing some of these issues in a very direct way. Many of those individuals and or organizations were not, how can I say, there were some challenges from a technical assistance standpoint because many people don't know. It's not really easy because of compliance reasons to get through a procurement process. And so that's the reason why we've instructed the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Community Programs to provide technical assistance to new organizations who aren't the traditional PIT organizations, who may not be privy to all of the compliance issues they have to go through and navigate through. And so that's what they're doing, Director Richardson. That's what we've instructed. And so, again, these dollars were applied for in December of 21. All the additional new dollars that will be coming before the city board will hit in addition to these areas, but also hit at the core what Director Richardson so eloquently laid out. And so you'll see also, we, due to this public health declaration, we'll have the ability to hire more more community violence intervention specialists as well as we continue to focus on this effort. So I want to just say you're absolutely correct, Director Richardson. Many of the things that you're speaking to, you're going to see more of that as we continue to address it in a real way. And wanted to say thank you for your leadership. And we do wish we could have new futures for youth. And I think for those who are involved in that work, that's also another type of organization that we're seeking to fund. Director Wyrick, then Director Miller.
I want to thank Director Richardson for clarifying the outreach to the individuals. The way he phrased it when he said these young people are having to navigate their way through issues to survive. And so what I hope we're doing with these programs are providing a way for them to navigate. How do they get to services? How do we get to them? Those kinds of things. When I look at the resolutions, I see that the Little Rock Police Department has identified hotspots in wards 1, 2, 6, and 7. So I think when we have our presentations next week, he should be a part of the presentation so he can identify his idea of the hotspots and stats and information so they can help us with navigating. I love that word, Director Richardson, navigating through trying to help our youth in the city. Who was the review committee for these applications?
Mr. Moore.
It was a combination of city staff from various departments.
Okay. They were involved in neighborhood housing community programs, so they would have some indications as to what is needed in the community.
Correct.
Okay. So this did not go through the CYF group at all.
It did this week or last week. It did go before the commission, and they approved. They, as Director Webb said, they're not a rubber stamp by far, and they had some very excellent questions, but then endorsed these 10, and then the 11th program,
Okay.
the
That's
day
good.
labor program.
That's good to know. When you look at the resolution, it also talks about that these applications met the minimum score for funding consideration. Exactly what does that mean, met the minimum score?
So
When I say minimum, I'm wondering, is that good enough? What are we really saying with that resolution?
sure. We have to, this is a two-step process. This is an RFP that looks at the merits of the bid initially. And I can assure you that what's before you is not everybody that submitted a bid. Some were
I
disqualified.
recognize some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them were disqualified. Some of them, the deadline was 12 o'clock and they sent it in at 2 o'clock. I mean, and that sort of speaks to some organizations that haven't been familiar with the city bidding process. So again, so the minimum score, and it's usually 80 points. And so everyone that scores at 80 or above goes to the second phase, which is then where we open up the price, and we can't look at that until they meet that minimum threshold.
So it really doesn't speak to they're not really qualified. It just talks about a phase that they have to go through to get to the second phase. Okay. Some of the things that we've always talked about with organizations that we work with in the city is the number of recipients that are going to get services from them. So I'd like to hear that from the group. And then also, as these kids, young adults navigate to these sites, we're always concerned about transportation, and do these organizations provide transportation to their location to get services, or how do they reach out? How do they get to the services provided? So when they do their presentations next week, I hope they'll describe what those efforts are.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. A number of my questions have already been answered, but I want to make sure that I understand this process. I've had a chance to take a look at the communication from the city manager that hits all the high points, the synopsis and the fiscal impact and the background, and I appreciate all that. And just taking some time to look at that. But want to make sure I understand. CYF, that's Children and Families, and that's the commission that was reviewing these?
Correct.
That's just an independent body. Of course, I know Director Webb is,
it's one of the
liaison with that, or?
It's one of the city boards and commissions, and actually is one of the only handful that actually has a city board as a city board member as a voting member. So that's correct.
And of course, you said this is a first list of organizations that we're taking a look at. I think Director Wyrick she asked a question that was on my mind. We got 10 that applied, or 10 that were approved, but I guess there were a number of organizations that applied, and if there were some that technically miss some deadlines and things, but if they have some good programs, I don't know what the process is for when we go back around the second time to really try to look at some programs that maybe get to that and they're not technically, because they didn't cross this I or dot this I or cross this T, then they were kicked out. But maybe it's a good program that we're taking a look at. And one of the things that I know is a challenge is administrating these programs and accounting for the dollars. And probably, like you said, City Manager, that's maybe some of the reasons they didn't get it in on time, because of maybe a lack of administrative support and detail. I think it may be a good chance for the city to be proactive and take a look at maybe standing up some accounting firms or maybe some type of social support organizations, fiscal support organizations that could get us the information we needed. Maybe let's think out of the box as it relates to that. One of the other things that I know that I'd like to take a look at, because I know we're focusing in on the youth that's 11 to, 24, 11 to 24 years old age group that is causing a lot of the problems that we're having. But I'd really like to see when we maybe take a look at the second round, or some things that we can take a look at is some parenting. What can we reach some of the parents? We need to understand the situation that a lot of these youth are dealing with, and maybe some parenting skills, and maybe some of these programs that are on this 10 list deals directly with the parent and the family. And so obviously I'll be taking a look at that and look forward to hearing that presentation. And then how proactive can we be as a board when we take a look at some programs that may be not in our market. And certainly I'm like Director Richardson, I want to take care of the programs that are in our market with the people that we know, that we've seen some results from, and maybe not have the administrative support. Maybe we can fix that. But national programs that may be out there, restorative justice type programs, are you looking for input maybe from board members that have reviewed programs that we see maybe have had some success in some other markets that we can refer to you? So I'm trying to understand how this whole process works. I appreciate the background information and the fiscal impact and the synopsis and how these organizations came about and how they scored. But there may be a bunch of other organizations that didn't score high enough for whatever reason. And I want to make sure that we take a look and just not throw out some programs that, because they don't have the administrative support, maybe we can try to fix that some kind of way and work with programs that we think are good but don't know how to score on an application, if that makes sense.
So Director Miller, you're speaking music to my ears. Again, just for context, these 10 organizations all applied before the public health emergency. They all applied when we announced back in October that we would pursue the Office of Neighborhood Safety to provide more dollars for community programs to do quality work as it relates to youth and young adults specifically. During that process, as we continue to look at data, we know we have to address not only youth and young adults, but we have to go off-site. And when I say off-site, meaning going direct to the areas in a very direct way. And so because of that, as we move forward in understanding that we did have this broad range and recruitment of individuals to come before, we learned that everyone doesn't know the traditional community programs application process or proposal process. There's a lot of things that many people may not be aware of, even with dealing with the Department of Health and Human Services, that you have to get some clearance from that standpoint. That is the reason why we've directed community programs to now provide technical assistance to those that are pursuing opportunities for funding. And out of that, we've decided for many of the what we would consider not the larger projects, but many of the other projects that may not need to require a proposal as it relates to, think about community violence intervention interrupters. People are really boots on the ground helping us from that standpoint. What we've decided is community programs, they will now do it when they're technical assistance. It is a application versus a proposal for those type of programs from that standpoint. So what you're saying is we agree with you. And then secondly, from a board standpoint, I think one of the things is we want to get more and more individuals to apply for these dollars that aren't the traditional types that have been applying for the last 10 to 15 years, but really are focusing on the root causes, but in a more direct way, in an innovative way. I give a great example. We have a couple of organizations that we are working with right now where production studios are a safe place in these times, and we're trying to figure out a way to create a more of an incubator space to get individuals more focused on the business side of production, and that's a way to kind of hit at that as well. We can go into greater detail later about that, but there are a lot of innovative things that are happening in these new organizations, these new groups. We're working with them to get the technical assistance because the city attorney still has to do a contract with the city dollars. And so we are using all of our efforts to ensure that we can work with those organizations and or individuals, whether it's dealing with youth and young adults, whether it's dealing with parents that are new to dealing with city government. Again, that's another reason why with the public health emergency gives us the opportunity to kind of expedite some processes, work within compliance to still remain legal with the city attorney. And we're grateful for the city attorney and all of his efforts that he's been getting us to that point so we can get more money out on the streets in the right areas as what Director Richardson has shared is what you have shared. So we're all on one accord there.
Thank you.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon to my colleagues. A couple questions, and I appreciate everyone else's because it makes mine shorter. First, I think I asked this last week, but if I didn't, I want to make sure. These organizations that are receiving these funds, I heard Director Compeers ask this question about how do we go about continually funding if they come back and apply again next year. My understanding of the PIT budget is that it's a rolling budget, and more likely, where recent history, we hadn't been able to spend all that money. Is that fair, Mr. Manager?
Correct.
Okay, so I say that to say that I'm encouraged by the work that the staff is doing, and I think based on my understanding of previous dollars spent, there may be opportunities if these groups work out and we start to see the results we want to see, that there will be money there for them in the future. I'm hopeful for that. Secondly, to Director Miller's point, and I'm just throwing this out there as an idea, and I don't know if anyone needs to respond to this directly, but it seems like there needs training day to happen with some of these organizations that want to get involved, the ones that have missed the boat. So maybe we take somebody from, that department and, we have a day where we say, hey, if you are interested in getting city dollars, show up on Tuesday, hang out with us, learn how this works. We're going to help you make sure you don't miss the boat because we want you to have the resources to do the work that needs to be done. So I think that may be something to look into. And then lastly, I'm not sure which of my colleagues asked this question, but I don't know if it got answered. If it did, forgive me. But who's going to make the presentation? I know there's been a lot of questions about the presentation, but who's going to do that?
Yes, the presentation is going to be within the organization. Now, we definitely will have Ms. Dana Doucette who will be available. But I think, again, it goes back to Director Compeers' standpoint. At the time of when these proposals went out for bid, the focus was focused solely on community violence. It wasn't specific to 11 to 24. We clearly know much of the dollars, no matter who's involved with prevention, intervention, treatment, it goes to all youth, and as well as youth and young adults. So that's not a, I want to make sure we're very clear. Before we set forth with the public health emergency, where we are very deliberate in 11 to 24, the proposals had already went out back in December. So, but many of the organizations that you'll come before you, whether it's UAMS, Our House, Urban League of Arkansas, Boys and Girls Club, clearly they represent or targeting youth and young adults. But back to Director Richardson's standpoint, we also are focused on some other areas that are really going direct into the areas that we can draw a box on where the crime is, on how we focus on those targeted approaches for those programming. So want to make sure it's clear there from that standpoint. So there both will be, Director Dana Doucette will be here available to speak through the whole process, because I think members of the board were asking about the process, and clearly she can speak to that process and also the technical assistance that the Office of Neighborhood Safety is providing to these new organizations that are coming before us who need that, who may need some extra help, some extra technical assistance to be in compliance with legal. So that is already happening right now. And I do think, because we know it's already happening right now, I think Director Phillips, that's a great idea. We do something similar with our supplier diversity with the Office of Procurement when we have a supplier diversity day on how do you sign up to truly be a vendor and get all the things. So we can do the same thing. So thank you for that idea. So it expounds upon what the Office of Neighborhood Safety is doing with that one-to-one contact, but actually opening up more to any and everyone. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, and to the extent it just could be an ongoing thing, where we just make sure we don't, a year from now, we don't forget that there may be another organization that don't know this process. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, I think you motioned to make some comments.
And obviously this was pre-COVID, but that's exactly what the Department of Community Programs had been doing as far as the technical assistance for those individuals who did not make the cutoff score. But we also, because someone mentioned it, bringing the successful organizations together to talk about exactly what each organization does and answer any questions. We do that. So I think, and again, we've learned over the years. I will tell you probably the one thing that has disqualified more organizations over my tenure is, and it's changed a little bit now because we take electronic bids, but the CEO or the president of the board has to sign the application. And if they don't, because it's basically saying they're authorized to seek this funding, if they don't, it's an automatic disqualifier. Is that fair? Well, we've debated over the years, and the organizations that did sign it, they followed all the guidelines. So I just wanted to point out that those two areas are something that we have done in the past and will expand our efforts in the future.
Director Richardson, and then Director Webb.
I had my hand up for a while.
I'm just looking at the line, but since Director Richardson has spoken, we can come. Let's just go Director Richardson, because I saw him first, and then, but I'm just going up in the line, Director Wright. You're after Director Webb.
Thank you, Mayor. To Bruce's point, who made that decision? Who made that decision to have the CEO sign off on that? Who's doing the evaluating of these programs? Where's that coming from? I think Director Miller made a good point that it points it all back to us. If we talk about that box, not only do we have to heal the young person, we have to heal the family that produced the young person, and ultimately the community that produced those families. A lot of them have a lot of common denominators. Look at the housing structures, look at the infrastructures, look at the food deserts, financial deserts, unemployment rates. underemployment. The 18 to 15-year-old disconnected adult age range, and very rarely would I say but I would say this time introduce an ordinance to provide incentives for people who saw contracts with the city if they hired a certain percentage of young people who fit that category. I had a colleague have a group of contractors and construction workers come down there to speak against it. They came down there. I asked them to meet with them the following week at my office at New Futures, and they kept saying mandate, mandate, mandate. Now that colleague had told them it was a mandate. I went to my office and said, "Give me 1 minute, guys. I got that ordinance that Tom had written out for me, and I asked him to find the word mandate anywhere in here. You cannot. It's incentives. You get incentives on your bids. You weren't mandated. You would get incentives on your bids, and both of those contractors had programs at these prep school programs that they run. They couldn't guarantee me that they got 100% employment rate, so they were down there essentially speaking against their own best interest. Bruce, who made that decision? Who's evaluating these programs? Who's monitoring these programs? Director Miller, your point about it goes back to the family. I think you're right, but also it goes back to the community, and then it comes back to us. Everyone now thinks that we can just wave a magic wand and just work with the young person. That's going to solve it. No, it's not, because they're a reflection of the communities that they come from, unfortunately. And a lot of those communities are in parts of my ward, and I wouldn't even call them communities. I'd call them neighborhoods. They're not communities because they have a high rent occupied home rate. And Director Roderick, thank you for the recognition of my navigate comment, because a lot of them are navigating a number of systemic minefield as well. A lot of them are navigating a lot of systemic minefield as well. Going back to what I said about the opioid, it's a health issue. It's not a criminal justice issue. We tried in 1992 and 93 to do the same thing with crack. No. That's a criminal justice issue. I think Bruce and Dean and Joan and others were on board when we had Future Little Rock in 1993 when that tax passed in December of 93 and gave us funding for PIT. They were on board to help us put a system in place that was going to make it easier for these programs who couldn't get state or federal or foundation funding to have access to funding to provide supportive services in the communities that they're located in. Who is determining where we're putting these programs? Who's doing that kind of evaluated demographic data that gives us the assurance that we're targeting the right area and funding the right programs? And that's my biggest concern right now with all of this. And I thank you guys for doing this. I think it's much needed. I have concerns about the effect that this is going to have on this, what we call an emergency right now.
Mr. Moore, you'll answer that question. I know you've had more experience in the long term with community programs the last several years.
There's the process that's in place is the first review is done by finance or the procurement office just to make sure that they met all of the technical aspect of the bid. Is it signed? That's probably the number one review. Then it goes to a review committee that we've used a lot of different variations where we had experts in these fields to evaluate. They're volunteers. They have other jobs. So that became a challenge. We had the CYF set up a review committee, and in this case, it was staff made up throughout the city that's involved in these programs or involved in this space.
So who quantifies the review committee as experts? I'm assuming you're talking about the RFP committee that looks at those before they go to CYF. So who quantifies them? Who determines them as expert, and who chooses them to serve on those committees?
Each department, and this is unique to community programs, by our policies and procedures, each department will make a recommendation to me to approve the review committee. I look at it, I look at the makeup, and if I feel like it's sufficient, I'll approve it. If I say, well, it needs to be a little more diverse, there's not enough, there's not any females on the committee, then I'll send it back. So that's the process.
Well, that's a little bit different, Bruce, than how we had done it in the past, because in the past, I thought we had chosen people who had done work in that field and had demonstrated some work in that field. I don't remember any departments other than community programs being at the table for those RFPs. So that's somewhat different in that we don't have people who are experts or people who have knowledge or people who have experience in the field that we're trying to address.
But again, you're limiting yourself so much when you can't be part of an organization that gets city funding at all. So that limits your scope somewhat. And again, these are volunteers that we are asking to come in and do a lot of work. It just became a challenge, and when when our charge is to try to get these dollars out, as quickly as possible through the proper process, then that's what I recommended us doing.
Well, Bruce, I remember when we first started that in 1994, and when we first started year-round gang intervention prevention programs, I remember working with Miss Nails, and I recommend that we consult with her in the selection of those RFP members, because I would rather have 4 people who have knowledge in this field than to have 10 people, just to say we have 10 people on the committee. To me, it's not the number of people, it's your knowledge base and your willingness and your desire. And we have more people willing to volunteer. I agree with you back then, more willing to volunteer back then. Something has happened along the way, along this process. I don't know if that's internally within the city. Something has happened that's cut back on the number of people willing to volunteer. But we had people who were willing to volunteer, who had knowledge and experience and actually lived in parts of those communities and engaged those young people who were suffering from the stuff we're talking about. That's how I hired coordinators. Second time I'm going to use I hired people who not necessarily the best educated, best employed, most education, best employment history. I hired people who knew the community and the community knew them, and they were concerned and trying to help the community, regardless they were getting paid or not. I remember, it's the last time, BJ, I'm gonna say I remember we were in July of '94. We were ducking bullets down in Granite Mountain behind a truck, and one of the coordinators said, "Ken, we don't get paid enough for this." And one of the other coordinators said, "Man, we don't do this for pay. We do this because we care. We do this to help some people who look like us stay alive and be positive and productive." So I think there's some internal things we need to look at as well. And I think the easiest thing for us to do is just say, well, we've got these programs out here working with these kids, and the kids sometimes become reflections of their homes, as Director Miller just mentioned about parenting, and the homes become reflections of the communities. That a lot of times we, as board members, have a role in determining what they look like, what opportunities are there, and what opportunities are not there. Um, some things we allow in certain parts of our community, some things we don't allow in other parts. We have a disproportionate number of liquor stores, convenience stores in certain parts of our city that we don't have in other parts of our city. We have a disproportionate number of vacant homes, boarded up homes that are actual, according to research, become magnets for criminal activity. They become trap houses. Those vacant cars sitting around, they become trap houses. The cars that we have parked on the street become trap cars. Excuse me, I'm sorry, trap cars. So you have a lot of criminal activity emanating from all these vacant structures, be they cars or homes, and we need to figure out a way to address that. We need to address the housing situation in parts of these communities. That's a real big issue. And the issue is beyond just let's fix the kid and everything's gonna be okay. I think that's juvenile in thinking and that's going to solve it. I'm sorry for my tone again tonight, but I don't think that's it. I mean, I think we need to look at it, and we keep tossing around these catchphrases like holistic and comprehensive and wraparound. And in reality, we shouldn't be doing prevention. We should be doing youth development, intervention, and treatment. Because when you talk about prevention, problem-free does not mean fully prepared. We moved the task force from the prevention of youth violence to the CYF. Why haven't we evolved PIT to something else? Prevention, it's you have experts across the country that'll tell you problem-free does not mean fully prepared. So we need to move toward the youth development aspect of our programming, preparing these young people, and equipping them with skill sets that's going to make them be positive, productive members of our community. That's what we want. That's it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Director Richardson. Um, Director Webb, going back in order, then Director Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. I'll be quick. And while all of the directors have had fairly lengthy comments with a lot of questions, I only wanted to address a couple of things that Director Miller said, just so he would have some context for some things. First of all, last year, probably about 8 months ago, I met with some groups who are doing work in other cities who have national programs, who are evidence-based. Some of those programs include violence interruption programs. I know Manager Moore has met with them. Dr. Barth also, I believe, had a meeting with them. And so I'm going to reach back out to them and find out the status of their interest in working in our city. But I was very impressed with what they had. So yes, there is great interest in talking to some of these organizations. It's point number 2, and this is a point I raised in the committee meeting last week, or the commission meeting last week, and I just want to get it on the record for as we move forward. Some of the groups had issues with the website. Some people who have who do great things in the community may not be the most skilled at turning in things on the internet. And one of the things that our website does not do is send an email that says your application has been accepted. And I talked to a lot of people who turned things in, completed it absolutely correctly. But I've talked to a couple of programs, one who sent in evidence-based programming. I've been talking to them for well over a year about these programs. They thought they had sent everything in, but I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure when we see things in the pipeline, we're not here to let people turn things in late and then mess with the system, but I think we do have a responsibility, as others have said, to assist applicants. And so I hope that we will figure out a way if we can send people an email that says your application has been accepted. So that was second point. Third point, I'm scared to use this word since Director Richardson just talked about wraparound services, but I think at some point we would be well served to have Dr. Barth do an update on community schools, because I realize, Director Miller, that I'm able to talk to Dr. Barth once a month at CYF and get an update on what's happening with the community schools model, but not everybody gets that. And so I hope that we'll schedule him for a board meeting soon. Sorry, Jay, for volunteering you for that. And then the fourth point that I just want to make is, while we have talked about youth who are 18 to 24, one of the focal points that I've had for over 5 years is to talk about things that are SEL related. And we've talked about that. We talked about that before Mayor Scott was here, when Mayor Stodler was here. We have one group that has asked for an SEL program. We had somebody on staff to do SEL, and that person retired. But I'm going to send out some articles that I sent out a while back, but I'm going to send them out again. because we've got to start at an earlier age. 5 or 6 years ago, we talked about the fact that we had 5,500 youth between 18 and 24 who were not in school, not employed, and not in job training. And then that's a number that we talked about at the commission. And then we go back to how do we do things like Director Richardson said. It's not it's not intervention, it's preparation, and it's making sure that people are prepared for opportunities. And I'm a big believer in SEL, and so I hope that as we move forward, we could reconsider. And some of the community schools are doing SEL, and I'm just really glad. Director Miller, I hope some of that information was helpful to you.
It was. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Webb, and we will definitely get Dr. Barf to come before and give. I know you've gotten a lot of updates with CYF. I know the most recent announcement is where our community schools model was funded with a $1 million U.S. Department of Justice grant, and many members of the board were at that press conference. But we'll definitely get Dr. Barf to do an update here shortly. And then secondly, we will definitely get, the website situated to get a response. Mr. Moore, if you'll work with IT to get that situated. And just want to make sure we're following up Director Webb. Thank you so much. Director Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question is, I heard you say that these applications were actually submitted in December, October. The notice went out and they came in October. When is the next bids going out? Because I know that I have been working with a group out here that had intended to apply, and I know they didn't then because they didn't have their application together. But we were in discussion about the cure violence model that Peck referenced. I'm very familiar with that. Done a lot of research into it, and this entity that I have been talking with was looking at that model and was wanting to implement it in my area because I need violence interrupters out here. And so I wanted to know, Mr. Moore, when will the next bids go out so that I will have some idea on how to advise them, because I know they did not submit in this first round of that we're talking about here.
Correct. I thought it was important to get this round over and adopted by the board before we put the other RFP out, just because there could be some organizations that applied and didn't make the minimum threshold. And so we want to, again, we'll have the TA with them, but also, so it's not confusing where you have overlap and, well, did I get an award here? Or do I apply for this award when it comes up? So you all hopefully adopt this on the 15th, and then the RFP will be released soon after.
Now, was there an was there a bid that went out in January, or there was nothing since this initial one? Is that correct?
I believe so. I believe so. But like I said, we'll very quickly, once this round is complete and approved, then we'll put the additional bid out.
To get you a direct answer, Director Wright, is what is going before the board. You all remember, just to walk the board through the process. We made the announcement, and this is yet another reason why we want to expedite procurement processes. Made the announcement mid to late October. Director Wright, you were at that press conference on middle of October. Then you have to go through a procurement process where we were not able to get the applications out until early December. Then they were due mid to late December. Then take some time to do some scoring. Here we are now. It's February the 8th. We need to do a faster job at getting those dollars and things on the street while maintaining compliance and technical assistance. And so this helps condense this. So we hope this month to do a second round targeted towards the things that you're talking about, that Director Richardson's talking about, Director Webb, Director Miller, and many other directors here today.
And Mayor, thank you so much for the crisis declaration. I truly do appreciate that. And I'm hopeful that we can expedite this because it takes entirely too long. And when you're in a crisis situation, have to be able to move with due speed. And I do realize that we used to do peer-to-peer training. I'm hoping that we will do that again as a part of the training process for new entities that are coming aboard, because I believe that this organization that was approached me about doing some work out here will be a new organization to the city. They may have done some other things with the city, but it's never in this area. And I truly do need the violence interrupters. I'm a food desert. I'm a financial desert. Um, it's just very challenging to try to address a lot of these issues without any resources. So I really appreciate that crisis resolution. Thank you so much.
And let me just clarify on the community-based intervention, that actually, the one you were referring to, Director Wright, did go out in January. And that's also the one that I think you called or texted me about when it was closing, and it was that same day. So those are being scored now, and as soon as that's completed, we'll send that back out.
Okay, thank you. I thought there was one, but I was getting kind of confused because when I saw all of these, I said, okay, I'm not seeing anything that, as Director Richardson and has said, that's actually going out to these areas and to the young people that need to be addressed. These were all site-based, and my side, I'm not interested in that site-based. I needed violence interrupters. So I did think there was another one. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for that clarification.
And thank you, Mr. Moore. So that was the community violence one. That's January?
Correct. That went out in January. The other ones, I think it concluded the last week of December. Community interveners went out in January. That's already closed, and they're being scored, and will be coming before the board.
Okay.
Thank you. And Director Wright, thank you for your vote on the declaration as well. I know you very appreciative of that, as well as everyone else.
Thank you.
Any more questions, board members? No, we went through all 1 through 6. Do we have any questions on 7 and 8?
I would like 7 to be kept separate, please.
Director Adcock has asked that 7 be held separate. All right, any questions on items 9 through 11?
We see the pictures on item 9, please.
Director Adcock is requesting pictures for item 9, tech team. All right. No more questions in regards to those?
We have a presentation on 11, please.
And presentation on 11, well, 11 is the recommendation to remove the fee. We did a very long presentation at the last 2 weeks ago and said we were recommending to remove the fee. That would be the presentation.
Okay, can you please repeat that we are removing the fee from the bulky items?
Subject to the members of the board voting on it next week, yes.
With,
Yeah.
one,
And with the,
I know some of the people have been calling, wanting to know if we've taken action on that yet, so.
but, the vice mayor suggested and we agreed that, we would have some standard. And so included in this is it goes away, but after the fourth, pickup, then the fee will be charged.
Okay, and when does that start?
I don't know if Tom put an emergency clause on here or not, but the board passes it and then it goes like 30 days after unless Tom adds an emergency clause.
I think we did.
Mr. Carpenter, can we have an emergency clause, please?
Looking this very second.
but yes, Director Adcock, we did proceed with the recommendation through the ordinance to remove the fee with the governor, and the governor being at the four. If there's someone did more than four, then we would reenact it.
Director Adcock,
Yes, sir.
it does not have an emergency clause, but I think we can add one.
Can you put one on it, please?
I will, typically, it makes it applicable immediately upon passage. This is one where we may need a week or two just to get everything fixed and up and working so it could be used. And so I would suggest that we leave that as a possibility.
Thank you.
Director Wright,
Yes,
did you have?
Yes, before we go to item 12, I wanted to follow up with the board and Mr. Moore regarding our C3 zoning. If staff has begun to review that to see how we can limit what's in C3 or even come up with another zoning so that everything is not so broad. Have they begun to look at that? Mr. Moore?
I know the planning director has begun the process, but we don't have anything to review at this point.
Okay. I appreciate them working on that and I have some ideas. I've been researching this in other cities to see how they do it, to try to help protect some of our neighborhoods, protect all of our neighborhoods, but to really deal with a lot of the multifamily developments and kind of at least put some type of buffer in there so that it's not so intrusive on these established neighborhoods. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Director Adcock, then Director Wyatt.
Mine was from last time.
Director Wyatt.
On item number 11, I appreciate a good vote on this. I talked about it enough in the budget hearings in the last few weeks that I really appreciate the board giving us a good vote on this. I would like that we have a follow-up, at least quarterly, to let us know how we're doing. I think we all were kind of surprised at the graphics that were presented to us in the number of pickup in 2019 versus 2020.
3-month deal.
Yes, ma'am. We'll do a quarterly report.
Okay, is Bruce talking to me? No? Okay.
Yeah, I was talking to Susan because that was part of what your request was. So I think it's every 90 days.
Yeah.
We were going to update.
Yeah,
But it'd probably be 90 days after it goes into effect. So
that's fine. That's fine. I just think we need to keep our eyes on what's going on with it. As I said, I think we kind of got surprised about the information. I would appreciate a good vote on that. On item number 7, that was the one with the cement plant. We got the noise study in, and I've asked Jamie Collins has some information that he's going to present to the board in regards to the noise study. I thought we'd have it today, but I don't think I got it. So I'm pretty sure he'll send it to all the boards. So I hope you'll pay attention to the noise study that's going to come through, or the information that Jamie's going to come up with. The other thing is that I'm in agreement with Doris on the C3 zoning. I think in order to protect our neighborhoods, we need to make some revisions to that. The R5 zoning that's a by right use in C3 is very concerning to me. And also, I remember in the past that we've been able to look at C3 zoning and say to the applicant, or the applicant would voluntarily say, well, I'm not going to put a liquor store in, or I'm not going to put a barber shop, or, you know, whatever business that might be objectionable to the community. And I've been told in the last 2 weeks that even if the applicant said that they would take those uses out, that the city cannot, they cannot follow up or enforce that. That makes C3 zoning even more problematic for our infill development in our communities. So whatever we can do to make C3 better when it goes into infill areas, you know, I think it's pretty important that we try to follow through with Doris's director ideas on that. Thank you.
And let me just say, that's one of the things that obviously we're going to have to involve the city attorney's office in too, because, you know, if I'm a particular developer and I bought a piece of property knowing that it's already zoned C3, you know, what type of liability does the city potentially have? So we're going to have to work with the business community.
Yeah,
Also,
I know it's not an overnight turnaround, but if you don't start looking at it and seeing what things you can do, then it'll never get done. So
Exactly.
I hope that we'll take a look at C3 zoning and see what relief we can get from that. I've talked to Jamie at length about it, and if you already have C3 usage and you've had it for a bit, then it becomes very difficult. So I understand that, but if we don't start, we're not ever going to get our goal accomplished.
Thank you so much. Make sure I have everyone. Mr. Moore, if you would share the presentation on options regarding renewal of the 2012 millage.
sure. Thank you. I know you got it electronically. Actually, if you could go ahead and pass out a hard copy, because I know some board members like a hard copy. today really just wanted to kind of give the board, I've talked about it a few times in the past, that our current 3 mills will pay off sometime this year. And in order to continue that, we'd have to have a vote by the citizens of Little Rock. So I wanted to sort of just go over 2 examples of how we've done it in the past. So if we go to the first slide, this is from an article in the Democrat Gazette, which was printed the day of our last election in 2012, and just really gave a history of this particular mill levy. As you can see, it started in 1958, it was renewed in 1965, 1976, 1987, 1994, 2003, and then 2012. So this particular, and we've been very fortunate each time the citizens of Little Rock have voted to renew the millage. Some of you all would remember in 2003, there were actually 9 separate items on the ballot. And we will hire bond counsel. In fact, that RFQ just closed and is about to be renewed or about to be reviewed. But I won't read all of this, but just gives you an example of 2003 and then what we did in 2012. So, and again, the board will have to approve all of this by a vote at the board level. And so just the example from 2003, again, 9 different questions. So the first one had to do with fire department improvements. The second one had to do with police department improvements. And again, we hired bond counsel who works very closely with our city attorney. You might say, well, why can't you just put that as far as one ballot title? But he's been very consistent that you have to separate it because sometimes you're buying land, for instance, for the fire department, and that might not be the case for the police department. If you go to the next page, we were able to combine police, fire, and emergency because this was our 911 system. So that's why we were able to combine police, fire, and emergency communication that year. Question 4 was street improvement bonds. And again, if you look at question 4 and then question 5, you would think we could include both of those in one question. And the bond counsel and the city attorney has always said that's just 2 separate issues. We also did $14 million worth of park improvements. Some of you all would remember we also put about $1 million in just school area pedestrian safety. Again, that was a critical point at that time in 2004. Animal service improvements for $1.3 million. And then we even had $1.1 million in for Robinson and State House. So again, that was in 2004. Fast forward to 2012, and if you remember, the city had successfully passed a sales tax the year before that dealt with parks and zoo and those other items. So the board voted in 2012 just to focus on infrastructure. But again, there were 2 questions on the ballot, one dealing with street improvements and then one with drainage improvements. Things have changed as far as when municipalities and counties can hold special elections. So I'm going to ask Emily to go through the next 2 slides.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Act 610 from 2021 took effect on January 1st of this year, and it limits special elections for us to 4 times per year. And so in non-presidential election years, which we're in right now, special elections shall be held on the second Tuesday in February, May, August, or November. And then in presidential election years, the special elections are to be held on the second Tuesday in March, May, August, or November. And then it further clarifies, though, that special elections in months of preferential primaries or general elections shall occur on the date of those preferential primaries or general elections. So when we look at the next slide, the 4 dates for this calendar year are today, February 8, 2022, as the second Tuesday in February. May 24 is the date of the preferential primary with early voting starting May 9. And then August 9 is the August date as the second Tuesday of the month. And November 8, 2022 is the general election date with early voting beginning October 24. And then lastly, the special elections cannot be held less than 70 days after the date the ordinance is filed with the county clerk. So for instance, if you're looking at an August date, August 9 of those 4, you'd have to back it up to May.
So wanted to sort of give the overview of a calendar. And as Emily mentioned, you have to 70 days before the date. So again, if we were going to recommend an August election, that would have to have the ordinance to the clerk by May, I think the middle of May. So as far as next steps, we think it's critical that the board have a lot of input into what this package eventually looks like. So my suggestion is that we come back on February 22nd. The board can spend some time looking at what we've done in the past, what you all feel like we need to try to address. As I mentioned, we're close to hiring a bond counsel. And then we'll have some discussions in February about what our capacity would be if we did a 15-year extension or 20 or 25, what that might look like. So remember, only can be used for capital. They really changed the definition in a lot of ways. For instance, whatever we do sort of has to last the life of the project or the extension. So, for instance, even though we need to buy police vehicles, they have a active life about 5 to 7 years. So that wouldn't be eligible. Now, probably a fire apparatus that probably has a useful life of 15 to 20 years we could include. So those are just some opening thoughts. I wanted to get the board to begin to think about it, and I think it's critical that we have this election this year. And so I'll open it up now for questions, but mainly wanted to give the sort of history of the bond renewal of the bond issue, and then give the board 2 weeks to really think about and some of the projects and categories you'd like to see us fund. We'd go back and sort of put a price tag on it. Again, in 2012, we issued, it was a 15-year bond that generated about $105 million. And we did that in 2 series because with all of the construction projects that are going on in Little Rock and Central Arkansas, the Public Works Department was nervous about getting everything done, the entire $105 million within that time frame. So that's why we issued 2 series. The second series was authorized by the board probably 4 or 5 years ago. So that's sort of where we are. And again, really look forward to the work session to get the buy-in and consensus, begin to get consensus around a special election to renew the bonds.
Thank you so much. No questions from members of the board. We'll now move forward to our policy discussion. Want to, as always, transition to, well, Director Phillips, I just saw your hand go up. Did you have a question before we go to?
I just want to, and I'm not even really sure how to ask the question, Mayor. So let me get it together, but it is related to the presentation about the bond. But I'll come back to it. I'm trying to make sure I asked it in a clear way without complicating issues. So just I'll raise my hand again later.
Do you want to ask that this evening or later? Because I don't expect, well, never know, but I don't expect our conversation to go terribly long. You definitely have the floor.
I plan to answer this evening. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sure. Just in general fashion, as we transition to our policy discussion on the COVID-19 emergency declaration, I believe that was set forth back in City Clerk. What was the date that we restarted? Because we do this every 30 days. Was it August?
The initial one,
The initial?
I think, was in August, I believe, and then it was renewed in the second meeting in December, effective December 31st on.
Got you. Thank you so much for that clarification. So every 30 days, due to scheduling, we did not have this past Tuesday, and so we're having it back before members of the city board. Director Compuris is the chair of the COVID-19 task force. I want you to share some comments. I'll also share some as well.
Stay the course. I mean, basically, we're getting better, but we're getting better because we're following the rules. We're getting better because it's going down, and it's not the time to say we're going to have a celebration. We'll have a celebration sometime in the future, but now's not the time to declare victory and move ahead because we haven't won the game yet.
Director Hines.
Again, I'll disagree that we've already seen the effects of masks with the aerosol virus that have no effect on preventing transmission of the latest variant. So as we've already seen, several other states are now beginning to lift their indoor mask mandate. I would disagree and say it's time to take away this emergency declaration and get on to living with this endemic virus. Thank you.
Director Adcock.
Mayor, this is not the discussion, but Saturday, we're going to have another vaccine clinic, and we still need people to come and get the shots. We'll be at Southwest Community Center 1 to 5 this Saturday. They can get $50 gift card for the first shot, $50 gift card for a second shot, and also we're doing the $50 gift cards for the booster shots. So I would like for the directors to help me pass this message around, and I still need some volunteers. So if any of the directors would like to come, this is the 12th, I think, of the vaccine clinics that I've done, and I would surely hope that this is getting to be the end of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Director Richardson.
Yes, ma'am. I'm getting used to the I mantra and rather than the we, us, and our mantra. So please forgive me. This is not how I normally operate, but I would agree with Dr. Compuris and disagree with Lance. Dr. Compuris is a doctor. He's in the field. Other cities are doing a number of different things than us from a pandemic standpoint, and also a violence pollution prevention standpoint. So I trust in our counsel, in the wisdom and our credentials, Dr. Dean, and I will abandon I will abandon our we approach and say, I disagree and I support what you guys are doing. Dean is a doctor, and I don't think he has any interest in giving us any advice other than to keep us healthy and alive. And I also, let me get back to the I again. Bruce, if I understood you correctly, even though the mayor moved on, if I wanted a particular item on the millage, if I wanted to pick item, if I heard you correctly, that means I could submit it and it could be considered as long as it fits the criteria.
I believe it's very important to get input and consensus from the board as we try to move forward with calling this election. So it's really going to be a brainstorming. Here's what we would like to see. Then we'll look at the categories, and then we'll look at the dollars. I mean, you can see from the presentation, you know, it's around infrastructure. Obviously, we've done some things around the recreation parks and zoo. And I will tell you, I wasn't with the city then, but the building that used to be here called this Adult Leisure Center, it was built with this capital bond. So we built community centers, the Southwest Community Center. So we've done a lot of different things over the years. So we just want to be sure that as we move forward, that there's board input and consensus.
Well, that was a place we used to have the task force meeting. I think that's when you began your internship at the city in the mayor's office. And this being an election year, I would just ask you to be prepared to hear a lot of I and word numbers in requests for items on that list, on that agenda, with this being an election year. I just prepare you as your friend slash boss to receive a lot of requests and a lot of additions and hear a lot of different wards associated with those requests.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think I've formalized my thoughts, and part of it was to help to my colleague, Director Richardson, for bringing this back up. Obviously, I wasn't on the board when these millage issues were passed. I know a lot of people on the board probably got some institutional knowledge on this that I don't have. So, Mr. Manager, I got a couple questions similar to what Director Richardson said. I'm looking at this. It doesn't seem like there was a number in mind. It was just, let's see what the projects are, and then we add them up, and whatever that number is what the number is. Is that fair?
Not really. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that really, but when we get the bond counsel, we then get the bond underwriter on board, and we have to look at everything from, you know, what type of coverage that is required now, and so it's pretty complicated in a way, and that's why we've always hired both outside counsel and an underwriter. But the most important thing is really ensuring that the board has input into the process. And will we be able to do everything that the board members request? No, just because of the limitations of the funding. But as I said in 2012, with the 15-year, we generated 105 million. You know, we would just look at, you know, and it didn't have to be 15 years. We typically pay those off early. That's why we're before you now. And so we can do 20, we can do 25. I probably wouldn't go over a 25 year for a lot of different reasons. But so again, I would look at the list from from 2004, and then also from 2012, and those are sort of the things we've done in the past, but not to say we can't do new things. But keep in mind, it has to go with the life of the issue, and it has to be capital in nature.
And to Director Richardson's point, are you going to solicit ideas from us? And I know I'm kind of in a unique situation, to Director Richardson's point. I'm at large, so I'm not in the ward. So I know that my ward colleagues probably have more, they look at this a little differently than I've been elected to look at it. So how are you going to solicit the ideas on what's included and what's not included?
That's the work session on the 22nd. And I mentioned that earlier. Give everybody 2 weeks to kind of look back on what we've done in the past, look at what the needs are now, and use that work session on the 22nd to begin to develop.
And that's what I'm getting at. So we're going to have a work session, and all of us going to have, all 10 of us are going to have 10 great ideas, right? So now you got 100 ideas. And what I'm asking you is how you shrink down that list of 100 ideas, 10 people with 10 great ideas.
Again, a lot will have to do with the amount of dollars that we have available. And if you look at the difference in the 2004 versus 2012, there were only 2 issues in 2012. It's because we had passed a sales tax the year before that dealt with a lot of the quality of life issues that we like to refer to. So it won't be something that I pare down. We'll bring it back and say, here's what we heard. We've also, the department directors will have an opportunity to just talk about what their needs are, per department. And I'll give you a good example. If you look at 2004, believe me, the 911 communications center wasn't on any of the board members' top list, but the police chief, Chief Thomas, and Chief Kerr, y'all felt that was a top priority, and we came to the board and said, this is critical. And again, it was a consensus, unanimous vote to put all those items on the ballot. So we'll look internally, but I know the board members have some priorities that they would want the executive administration to consider.
Okay, so in the last thing, and then I'll shut up so we can go home. To be clear, we're going to have this discussion on 22nd. Are you planning on having individual meetings with all of us too, or just one meeting on the 22nd?
Yeah, just on the 22nd, and then once everybody submits, then probably sit down individually to kind of talk about sort of here's what we heard, here's the capacity we have, and this is how we're going to move forward or recommend moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manager.
All right, seeing no other questions, I think we all want to say go Hogs and adjourn this meeting. Meeting adjourned. Director Wyrick, I guess you didn't want to say go Hogs. Director Wyrick.
I can say go Hogs as well. I'm still trying to digest the issue with the bond extension, and on here are is money for street improvements and for drainage, and I'm all about the infrastructure, trying to get improvements there. Are we going to have any data from Public Works or from any of the departments to talk about what our needs are, particularly drainage and streets? I know we put a lot more money into streets than drainage, but in Southwest Little Rock, we have a lot of drainage needs. So I think it'd be helpful if we could come up with information on that and sort of quantify the dollars for that particular one. And then, we're always talking about parks improvement as well. So, well, we talk about everything, okay? But, seems like the big dollars were, for, street improvements, infrastructure. So if we could have some, information from Public Works on those two, I would appreciate it. Maybe others would have questions about other areas, but that's key to me. Thank you.
Any more questions so we can go Hawks? Director Peck?
No,
Are you getting
I
close?
can turn this off.
All right, meeting adjourned. Go Hogs.